Just a reminder that the next program of College of Law Practice Management Content Committee is on June 18th at 2:30 p.m. Central, and the subject is talent management. So be looking for emails from the college if that's a subject of interest to you. I'm Terri Pepper, and I'm the CEO of TerraLex, which is a global network of law firms, although I know almost everyone on the call, or most of you, so you already know all about me. So let me introduce my presenters today, both of whom are former colleagues of mine from my Hildebrandt days. So I'm delighted that we were able to come together on this program. First, let me introduce Bill Johnston, who is the founder and president of Johnston Associates. And Bill does law firm management consulting, works with law firms of all different sizes on strategic issues, financial, organizational, and leadership issues. He's done this for many years, and before that, he had a career in accounting. And also, he served for 8 years relative to this program as the director of strategic planning at Cravath, Swaine and Moore, a little firm that I think a few of you have probably heard about. And he was also the first person in a strategy role at that firm, which was quite an accomplishment. And then Julia Hayhoe, who's joining us from the UK today, is the leader of Julia Hayhoe Consulting and has more than 20 years in the legal and professional services firms. And she does a lot of consulting in the areas of strategy development and implementation. She works with a lot of boards. Her niche is, and you'll hear about this today, about incorporating sustainability and ESG into strategy to develop the most relevant client services. Pam Cohn, I know that's music to your ears. And also how to operate as responsible businesses. And also relative to this program, Julia previously served on the Global Executive Committee and as the Chief Strategy Officer of Baker McKenzie. So we're very lucky to have people that are in consulting roles, but have also been in law firm roles and also work with on the corporate side. Both Bill and Julia have worked with corporate law departments. So welcome you both to the program. Let me just minimize this and start getting ready to share the screen. So today we're going to talk to you about strategy, why it matters now more than ever. We're going to give you a little bit of a look through what are some of the key requirements for an effective strategy. I would dare say that many of you on this call have been through ineffective strategies and ineffective strategic planning initiatives. We're going to take you through the typical process on that. And as I mentioned, Julie will talk a little bit about incorporating sustainability and ESG into strategy. And then the fun part will be that we're going to talk about some typical pitfalls and things that we've seen go wrong in strategy projects. We encourage your questions. We encourage you to reach out in the chat. You can post. I'm seeing someone has an AI assistant. Debbie, I don't know if the college has a policy about that. I'll leave it up to you. You can, but just post your questions in the chat or raise your virtual hand. And when there's an appropriate moment, I will stop and I will call on you. But I'm going to turn this over to kick us off. I will turn this over to Julia. And Julia, I guess I'll advance that far and then let you go from there.
Thanks, Terri, and great for everybody to be here. So I'll talk a little bit about why strategy matters, and also some of the sort of litmus tests that you can use to test your strategy as well. Before I hand on to Bill, he'll look at a typical process and some sort of best practice within that. So why strategy now? And Terri, if you move on the bullets. There's a real need for direction in strategy right now. If you think about all of the developments in the market, whether it's geopolitical changes, we've got half the population eligible to vote this year. We're halfway into the year, so we've got 64 nations around the world voting this year. So massive macroeconomic demographic changes going on. Tragically, we have war, we have conflict, we have significant disruption to energy supplies, energy security, we have social unrest, and we have digitization. So there's lots of systemic forces at play in the market, which creates a lot of uncertainty in business. And it's very difficult for a firm to navigate its way through this. So strategy is all about creating a sense of direction and also a sense of purpose. We'll come back to purpose when we talk about sustainability. So purpose is often phrased as, what is it you're all about at a firm beyond profit alone? What is your rallying call? it's around choices as well. So strategy is all about enabling you to make choices and prioritize. You'll know in law firms, one of the biggest challenges is you tend to add rather than subtract what you're doing. So it is about giving you that data, that external and internal data to make choices around what matters most for your clients, your people in your communities. And of course, people, that war for talent keeps going, and the ability to align a sort of dispersed workforce around a common sense of purpose and strategy. You know, whether we're coming out of the pandemic with a lot of disruption that caused, hybrid working, people dispersed. And also we now have 5 generations in the workplace, all with different
Julie,
preferences.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt? I've had several people reach out to me to say they can't hear you well. So could you maybe either get closer to your microphone or speak a little teeny bit louder? Sorry,
Yeah,
everybody.
sure.
I just now seeing the messages.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Can you hear better now?
Somebody give me a thumbs up if you can hear better now or post something in the chat. Go ahead and say a couple other things. No, they can't hear you better. I'm not sure why, because I hear you fine.
Yeah, and I did test beforehand, so I think maybe I keep going because
Very faint is what I'm being told.
okay, so it's I think maybe I need to keep going, or Terry, maybe you need to pick up now if you're
Well, keep going. They can hear you. Maybe just get as close to your microphone as you can, because I hear, okay, there's other people that hear you well. So
yeah.
those of you not hearing her well, I'm not sure what it is, because there's just as many that are hearing her just fine.
So I think I'll keep going, and then maybe Terry, you can jump in to
Sure.
emphasize some points, but we do need to keep a pace up. So it's all about direction, purpose, aligning people around common cause. And we quite like using the illustration from Lewis Carroll from Alice in the Wonderland. So Terry, if you keep clicking on, you'll see this little anecdote here from Alice in the Looking Land. Alice, would you tell me why and which way I ought to go from here? The Cheshire Cat, well, that really depends a good deal on where you want to get to. And Alice, I don't care much where. And then the Cheshire Cat, well, it doesn't matter which way will you go. So it's all about direction, it's about clarity, and it's about a plan. Because we know with law firms, if you don't have clarity, you don't have a plan, the best case is you drift, you start losing clients and people. But the worst case is when law firms get into difficulty, they don't just go bankrupt, they collapse, and very quickly, as we've seen from some terrible situations over the years. So Terry, if you go on to the next slide, so it's a bit about the why, but the what, you know, how do you test for strategic integrity? If it's all about taking you from where you are now to where you want to go, what are some of the tests? And again, Terry, if you can click on here. If you're thinking about your strategy, does it identify where you are different? Why us? It is your elevator pitch for your clients, for your people. What is it that makes you different? And it's got to be beyond culture. What is it in that intersection of your sectors, your clients, your practices, your people? What is it that really differentiates you? I always say with strategy, a good test of strategy is it helps you decide what you don't do. So which sectors, practices, jurisdictions, areas of law, what is it that you don't do to help you prioritize? Because in any strategy, you typically get quite a lot of a burden on a few practitioners who really often carry charge of strategy. It's also got to provide you with flexibility to seize opportunities, which is why we've seen much more movement towards design thinking, towards testing and iterating strategic initiatives around products and services so that you can course correct, and also the valuable role of getting client engagement and feedback in early. So you need both short and longer term goals. So with that, I think I'll hand on to Bill to talk a bit about the process.
Sure. Thanks, Julie. So what I've put up here is these are sort of the key steps in the strategy process. So when I'm working with a firm on strategic planning, these are the steps that I go through. I will say though, firms don't necessarily need a consultant to do the strategic planning, so they can do it themselves. And this is more or less the steps that you would take. So a couple things that I would point out. I'm not going to walk you through all the little bits and pieces here because you can see them. Couple things though I want to note. One is across the top, I just sort of put in a timeline. And obviously it's a made up timeline. Generally, my view on strategic planning is it's one of these things where like you want to step lively. You don't want it to drag on and on and on. So for this example, let's say it's a mid-sized law firm, it could be 50 lawyers, it could be 500 lawyers. The idea would be, let's put the strategic plan in place from day one until we know we have a plan. Let's give us about 5 months. If it goes beyond that, 6 months is sort of, the outer edge. But if it goes to 7 months, 8 months, 9 months, you'll get to a point of complete exhaustion. And by the time you roll into implementation, people will be so sick and tired of the plan that you won't get anywhere. So again, the idea, in my mind is step at a decent pace. Don't do things superficially, but keep it moving. So in terms of day one, I talk about the kickoff and the initial issues discussion. The idea is develop a strategic planning committee. Sometimes it's the law firm's management or the law firm's leadership. Sometimes it's a different group. It always should include law firm leaders, though, like the managing partner and the like. But sometimes it's a cross section of the partners. Usually it's not that big. 7 to maybe 11 members for a mid-sized firm is sort of the normal size. Have a kickoff meeting, talk about the history of the firm, because some of the members of the committee, oddly enough, even if they've been with the firm long enough, they may not know the firm's history. Why do we have an office here, and what was the other experiences we've had with strategic planning? So have a good kickoff, and then from there, do an internal assessment of the firm. And in terms of the internal assessment, it really should be a critical assessment. Like, what are we doing well? What are we not doing well? And what do we need to change? And how do you get there? The ways to get there are conduct internal interviews. Interview the partners, interview a cross section of the partners, interview some of the members of the professional team, some associates, the like. Survey all of the firm's lawyers if you have the time. Analyze the data, and that includes the financials and the like. Review the market. Look at your competitors. So ultimately, after about 6 weeks or so, you can come back to the table with the planning committee and say, okay, here is a legitimate assessment of the firm as it exists today. It's done at a fairly detailed level. It's a critical assessment, but you want to get a point where everybody agrees, okay, that is a clear picture of the firm as it exists today. And then from there, over sort of the next stage and kind of the middle of the chart, you want to start thinking about, okay, what's the vision for the firm? Like, we're all in agreement generally about this is the firm as it exists today, but what's our vision? Where do we want to take the firm? So what do we want it to look like in the future? And when I use the term vision, I'm not really talking about like a vision statement at all, but it's more like painting a picture of this is the firm that we would like to have in the future, so that we can get to a point where you can kind of connect the dots and you can say, okay, here's what we have today. That's what we want in the future. How do you build the bridges between the two? Like, what are the big, 4, 5, 6 kind of meaty things that we have to do to get to where we want? So that's kind of the vision. And what you might find is, develop some initial strategies, test them with some key decision makers, maybe who aren't on the strategic planning committee, just to make sure that we're going in the right direction. And then ultimately, you want to get to the point where you have buy-in for the strategy. So in some cases, firms will have a strategic planning committee. They'll kind of huddle up. They'll do all the strategic planning work, and they'll get to the end point where you have the plan in place, and then it gets presented to the partners. That's in some firms that works fine. More often than not, though, you have the strategic planning committees doing some of the work, but with regular touchbacks or feedback to the firm, really not the firm as a whole, but the partnership as a whole. Like, here's what we're thinking, here is what we're seeing, here are some of the results of our assessment, so that by the time you get to the full communication where we want to get together as partners, discuss the plan and launch into implementation, it's not coming to the partners as a surprise, because you're bringing them along during the course of the process and they understand the direction. So that's kind of the plan. Ideally, you get it done within about 5 months or 150 days in my example. But then the last piece, which is on the far right, really is the most critical. And we'll talk about strategy implementation pitfalls a little bit later. But the whole idea here is, if you can't get your firm to the far right column to the point of implementation, you may as well not do any of it, because although it's a fun exercise to think about the firm and kind of create the vision, if you can't put together a clear implementation plan and kind of blast the firm forward from there, you may as well not spend the time focusing on the strategy. It's just going to frustrate people. So that piece, and we'll talk about it later, the far right, that's the most critical piece, which is let's implement that. Let's implement the plan. Let's decide who's going to do what by when, and what are the critical steps that we have to take immediately and also within the intermediate term. So that's the whole thing. And, again, to me, a good, solid strategic planning process from step one to implementation should be about 5 months, maybe 6 at the outside, and certainly no longer than that. For most firms, you can't do it in a shorter period. You can't crank it out in 3 months, 4 months or so, because it'll just end up being superficial. So that's the planning process. And Julia, I guess I'll flip it back to you now.
And I just want to make one comment here, Bill,
Yep.
which is many of the people on the call are either in law firms or consultants to law firms,
Yep.
but we do have others that are in corporations, and this process really holds true in both scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. Frankly, this process, it can work well, I think, in any organization that's thinking about strategic planning, for sure.
And Bill, before we, hopefully people can hear me, before we leave this.
You actually got fainter. I don't know why, but you did get fainter.
Gosh, can you?
Yes, that's better. Whatever you just did is better. Yes.
Okay. Before we leave this slide and go on to sustainability, I'm just going to sort of bookmark you at the beginning where Bill has day one and he has market trends discussion. So we're going to pick up sustainability as one of the systemic market trends that you would consider in strategy. So it helps you understand why we're talking about this and where it would come into the strategic consideration. So you would be considering it right up front as one of the market trends, and you would be effectively running this theme through your current position analysis, your vision strategy, and through to communications. So it is one, but not the only one of the big systemic market changes going on that are impacting law firms. So let's take it from there. So this is a 4-step process that I've developed to help firms really navigate how to incorporate sustainability and ESG into strategy. And the first point that we're going to spend a bit more time on is around the business case. The why does it matter for your firm, which links us back to it being one of those market trends. People get very confused, and we'll see in a minute, around why sustainability, what is it, why does it matter to us, and why should it be in strategy? Well, it starts right at the beginning about developing your point of view, your board or your executive team's point of view on what does sustainability and ESG mean in business for our firm and actually for our clients and our people and our communities. So that is the starting point, to think about why does it matter? And I'll give you some more tips on this. Once you've done that exercise as part of the strategy, you can then go on to see how it would fit into a strategic framework. And Bill talked about vision. Now, vision is typically around your market position, which sectors, which clients, which jurisdictions, the nature of the people. Purpose would typically sit on top of that as being your raison d'etre, your why is it you exist beyond profit alone. And you're seeing law firms increasingly incorporate purpose into their strategic thinking in the same way that many of their clients are. So it will find its way into strategy through purpose, through values, and then through the strategic objectives. Governance is really key with sustainability because it comes into the say-do gap. What you hold yourself out as saying, the services that you may be looking to develop for your clients, the responsible business aspects for, say, diversity, inclusion, mental health, well-being, what you say you do and what you actually do. The decision making is really key. So who owns sustainability, and then how it finds its way through your decision making framework, your accountability framework in the firm. And then, because it's all about impact, how you scale your impact. So the market forums you might be on, the pro bono work that you will typically do with your clients, and the work in your communities. So let's go on to the first point that we're going to major in, because you've got to get this bit right as to your personal business case for your firm. So if you can click on, Terri. So it's really important for the executive leadership of the firm to develop their own point of view, the firm's own point of view as to why sustainability matters. What does it mean? And this is quite a useful framework to help you think through. And there has been quite a move in the market. And we've got Pam Cohn on the phone today, who's a real leading expert in here. And I often work with Pam. But sustainability has become the overarching term that businesses, your clients, will typically be using to describe a business's ability to create and protect value, its impact for its material stakeholders over the long term. And your material stakeholders being your clients and your people, and some businesses are even naming the planet now. So that is an open question mark. So it is the overarching term. ESG are three of the most material integrated areas of value, impact, and risk for a business. So you'll see there's a shift to businesses leading with sustainability, leading with responsible business, rather than ESG. And then any firm would sit within that as a responsible business around the impact that it has into the market and the impact that the environment and the social factors have on that firm. So this is a useful working definition that executive teams and boards would use to start thinking through why it matters and what it is for a particular firm. And if you go on, Terri.
Yeah, just a reminder to everyone, if you have any questions or you want to add anything to the conversation, feel free to use the chat. There you go, Julia.
Thank you. However, any one firm, any one business is on a journey on this, and you will hear sustainability called a transition, because we are moving from one place to another, like a strategy, moving from a current position to a future position, which is why it is a strategic program. It's not so much about where you are now and the demands and the supply changes now. It's about what is happening in the market around the regulation, around energy transition, around social issues, around Indigenous rights, and how they will play out in decision making, in buying patterns, in procurement into the future. And any firm will have a certain ethos and a certain sense of culture around sustainability. Some firms sit more into, look, we're just around complying. We just want to do the right thing by the regulations, the hard law, or some of the soft law. Other firms will see sustainability really around efficiencies. They may see energy efficiency, they may see it around cost savings. Other firms are leaning into the opportunity. They're saying, look, our clients' demands are changing. The decision makers in our clients are getting younger. They expect and value different things. So we believe it's got to be baked into our client and market facing strategies. Other firms, often founder firms, may have a real strong sense of DNA and purpose about them, where it's really baked into their culture and the way they do things. So it's important to think about where you sit on this spectrum and where you may be going over the strategic period. Next one, Terri. So to continue on, so the first step is very much understanding why it matters, what it is for your particular firm, which are the most material environmental, social governance issues and opportunities for your firm. You can then go on to look at the strategic framework and finding or refinding a sense of purpose for a firm. And purpose being defined as the reason the firm exists beyond profit alone. Who do we serve? So it typically means you will be naming your stakeholders, your clients, your people, question mark planet. And how do you ensure your approach is authentic, your say-do gap? Then sustainability will get embedded through your strategic objectives on your client side, on your internal side, and in your procurement and your supplier side. Which then brings us to governance and your ecosystem. So on the governance, lots of firms are quite challenged to say, how do we incorporate it into our governance structures? And typically firms are breaking out a responsible business steerco that is a subcommittee of the board. And sometimes a firm will also have a working group around their clients and markets, around the products and services they're looking to develop. That also leads into you sit in your client's value and supply chain. So we will increasingly be seeing EcoVadis, for example, and other metrics and requirements being put upon you by your clients. So it's important to then line up to frameworks and procurement mechanisms that are out in the market so that you can demonstrate accountability and reporting. And then the final piece is around really scaling your impact. So for law firms, the greatest impact you can have is actually on public policy. So some firms are very active in public policy development. Some firms, and many firms, are very active in pro bono work with their clients. And then the work that they do with their clients, there's increasingly a lot of partnering on sustainability and ESG with clients. So that is typically the cycle that you would work through along with the strategy process. And happy to take further questions.
Really interesting, Julia, how this all weaves in. And it's very challenging because you have so much to do, and this is this is probably the most important piece of it these days. Does anyone have any questions before we move on? We'll still have time at the end too. We'll open things up. Bill, you want to talk
Sure.
about the pitfalls, and then we'll give some horror stories?
Yeah, sure.
Or some
Thank you.
good stories too.
So now, we've almost come full circle. So in 27 minutes, we've come full circle from thinking about strategy to going through the process to incorporating ESG to, okay, now we're at the point of implementation. What are the pitfalls? And I've looked at this slide, and I've looked at these concepts literally for years, and they haven't changed very much, which I think is interesting. So when I see firms fall into traps at the point of strategy implementation, they kind of fall into, it's not a trap, they fall into the same holes over and over again. It can be firms of any size. They all have different strategic plans, but they keep tripping over the same thing. So these aren't in any particular order, but what are the things that I see firms trip over? The first is what I'll call ineffective leadership and communication. So I said in the beginning, with respect to like a strategic planning committee, it's critically important that the committee have, if not all of firm leadership involved in it, a significant chunk of firm leadership. So when you get to the point of implementation, what you really need is you need firm leadership to own the thing, to own the plan, and basically push it and support it constantly. So when I talk about ineffective leadership and communication, firms are led all sorts of different ways. In the strategic plan, when you get to the point of implementation, I think there are a couple of roles that firm leaders need to play. One is, in a way, they have to rally the troops. They have to be sort of the cheerleaders for the plan and get people excited about it. But at the same time, they often need to make hard decisions, because if you have sort of a strategic plan where there aren't any hard decisions, well, you probably just don't have a plan at all. It's just kind of a big mess of, we're sort of going to do everything for everybody. So effective leadership both owns and champions the plan, but often communicates with the partnership and with the firm as a whole about, here are the great things that we're doing as we're implementing the plan. And it's not a trick, but one of the things we often recommend for firms who are developing their plan is it's helpful to have some low-hanging fruit. So if, let's say, one of the plan initiatives is you want to grow your corporate practice in a certain way, it's often pretty helpful to know that sometime shortly after the plan is getting implemented, you have a corporate lateral, or a corporate group is joining the firm. So you can say, okay, we are making progress toward what we said, and it helps the leaders communicate, okay, we're moving forward with implementation. So that's one piece. The next is, when I talk about insufficient partner buy-in, often that happens because partners don't feel they don't feel part of the process of developing the plan. So it's kind of served to them on a silver platter, and they've maybe had a little bit of input, but they haven't been kept up to date on, okay, this is how the plan is evolving, and this is why it's good, and it's exciting for you and for your practice and for the firm, et cetera. So they ultimately don't buy into it. The plan comes out, they sort of shrug their shoulders and then go back to work. In terms of inadequate leadership attention, what I really mean there, and it actually kind of ties into what I just said, too often those who spent time developing the plan go back to work when the plan is done. Like they almost return to their offices and start billing clients again. Not that they weren't doing it during the process of developing the plan, but too often the point of the planning process was developing the plan, as opposed to the point of the planning process is implementing these things. So they get to the point of the plan's done, thank goodness, let's go back to work, and they just don't pay attention to it. And when the leadership of the firm isn't paying attention to it, the partners naturally aren't paying attention to it. And before you know it, you have one of these things that's kind of gathering dust. So you need constant attention to it. In terms of a weak or an inappropriate strategy, I think there are a couple of ways. One is there are a couple pitfalls that we see. One is a number of strategic plans. When you look at them, they're kind of nothing more than to-do lists. You know, these are the things that we want to do. And a lot of the to-dos are internally focused. So we want to, you know, change some of our governance structure. And it's not that these things aren't important, but they're not particularly strategic, and they're not changing the position of the firm. But we want to do something with governance. We want to do something with how we're managing staff. We want to, you know, and we want to look at all of these things, and maybe something with respect to our compensation system. Again, they're important things, but it's kind of a to-do list. These are the things that we're just gonna sort of check off. So I think a more effective strategy is it's more focused and it's aspirational. And some of the goals are big reaches. Now, in terms of being an inappropriate strategy, the big reach is not we're going to knock Wachtell off their pedestal. Enough already. We're going to knock them off, or knock off one of those firms off their pedestal. It's just inappropriate. You're not going to get there, but you can still have an aspirational strategy. The other little piece of sort of the weak or the inappropriate strategy that we run into periodically is, it's probably not a surprise that a lot of firms speak about, one of the things that we'd really like to do is grow our firm. So make this up, we're 200 lawyers, and within 3 years, we want to be 350 lawyers. And when you look at that and you say, well, but we're fiercely independent and we want to grow mostly organically. Well, how are you going to grow from 200 lawyers to 350 lawyers over 5 years without doing something dramatic to the firm? So there's a bit of a disconnect. Maybe what's a more realistic approach is, we're fiercely independent. We want to grow this great 200 lawyer firm that we have, but we're going to grow it up to about 240 lawyers. That's sort of more realistic, and I think it's sort of something people can grasp. That's what we're going to do, rather than we're going to go from 200 to 350, and we're never going to combine with anybody, because it's just completely unrealistic. Other pitfalls, resistance to change. I think this is just sort of like a human nature. It maybe it's a little bit exacerbated with the lawyer personality profile, but you know, there's just a resistance to change. I don't want to do things that different than what I've been doing in the past. And then the last pitfall that we run into is sort of the short-term mentality, which in a way I think you could equate it to a lack of willingness to invest in the firm. So in my example that I just used of sort of a 200 lawyer firm, where you want to grow to not 350, but you want to grow to 250 lawyers, it probably means you're going to have to invest. You're going to have to invest in groups that you bring in. You're going to have to invest in laterals. You may have to raise the firm's profile. All of these things really cost money. In some firms, the pitfall is that the partners are much more short-term focused, and sometimes they're focused on, you know, 5 years from now, I'm actually not even going to be with the firm. I'm going to be retired. So why do I want to pay for these things over the next 2 years if I'm never going to get the benefit? We run into that periodically. Fortunately, we also run into a lot of situations where very senior partners on the cusp of retirement want to see the firm thrive long after they leave. So are perfectly happy making massive investments now, even though they fully recognize that they're not going to receive sort of the rewards. But there is sort of the short-term mentality. Either I want quick hits, or I don't really want to invest too much. Part of the dynamic here too, I think, is the law firm financial model, which is effectively it encourages firms to spin out net profit as quickly as they can. So you clear the books and there's not very much money to invest. Getting past the short-term mentality is, as you roll out the strategic plan, you have to be very clear about, here is the implementation plan, and here are the investments that we're going to make. And then that that also ties into number two. Are we going to get partner buy-in? Because all of these things, all these pitfalls and the sort of the holes that firms fall into, so many of them are interrelated. But if you can get past these, you're well on your way to a solid plan implementation long term.
So before we move into some specific examples, because I think the picture tells a picture tells a good story, and that's what we're going to do in a moment. I have a question for you or Julia, whichever one wants to answer. Just out of curiosity, how frequently would you advise an organization to review or revise their strategy? Is there a number, or is it when conditions change?
Julia, I'll take it, and then you can jump in. Terri, what we typically say is firms regularly update and revise their plan. But if you're going to go through sort of that one of the first charts that I put up, that's like a really in-depth strategic planning process, it's not uncommon for firms to do something like that. Not even every 5 years, could be every 7 to 8 years. So they'll do that, maybe push it out to 10 years. So that's like a really in-depth, intense initiative. But it's not like they do the plan and then just kind of, move on for the next 10 years. What they're doing regularly is sort of a check-in and an update, and we're in kind of like a strategy refresh. And we saw a number of firms did strategy refreshes. The ones that did their strategic plan, say in 2019, a number of them did a strategy refresh in like 2021, 2022, because they lost a period of time. The market obviously shifted. So that can encourage taking another look at, the market shift can encourage taking a look at strategy, but it's usually not like the really in-depth thing. It's usually not quicker than every 5 years.
And they're painful. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But Julia, before I move away from this question, did you want to add anything to what Bill said?
Yeah, 2 points, and Bill's picked up one of them. Is market forces cause firms to review strategies. So digitalization, really big systemic changes cause firms to refresh their strategy. So whether it's sustainability, digitalization, the pandemic, so you get a big force there. And secondly, change of terms. So when you get new chairs or managing partners in, they typically are what forces and causes a review. What I see more often is strategic objectives being reviewed rather than the overall framework vision, but maybe particular aspects of the talent or the client or the jurisdictional agenda do get reviewed more regularly.
Great.
Mhm.
So we're going to talk about when it's problematic. And I want to go back, Bill, to this slide, because I'll start with a couple of examples and I want to reference this. And I actually have maybe some things that you might add to your pitfall slide. But I have a couple of problematic ones, but I also have a couple of successful ones as the end result. And the first one I would say is strategy in a vacuum. So when you talk about on that day one discussion and you're talking about market trends, I do see firms not do enough of a dive on this sometimes. So I worked with a firm and they had a local within their state, more of a local practice than a countrywide or global wide. And when they did their strategic planning, they never thought to look at what's going on, what kind of business was the community trying to incentivize, and what tax incentives were being offered to what types of companies. And they continued to pursue the retail sector, which had been the mainstay of this particular community. But the founders of the government of the community was now not offering incentives and not trying to attract that business, but rather was trying to attract the technology sector. And so they missed the boat on that because they didn't do the market trends right, and they were doing it a little bit strategy in a vacuum, as I would call it. They didn't tie it into what would be realistic for their firm to pursue. So that one I always I remember, that one stuck with me.
Terri, let me hop in
yes.
real quick on that.
Yeah,
So
go ahead, please.
when I'm looking at when we put up the slides, I was like rolling through this slide because I thought we were going to run out of time during the presentation. So one of the things that I skipped on this slide is where I speak about conduct internal interviews. And Terri, I think this ties into what you were saying. One of the things that I didn't put on this chart purposefully was conduct client interviews. And I didn't put it on the chart because so many firms are resistant to the whole idea of conducting client interviews. And, it's either because the partners don't want somebody speaking with their client, it's frankly, it's usually that dynamic. And yet so often when the firms themselves do client interviews or the consultant does client interviews, it yields all sorts of positive things. In your example there, that's a great example. Whereas if they had simply gone out and spoken with the stakeholders, they would have flagged, okay, there is this dynamic and we need to be aware of it. We had a strategic plan. Actually, there were a couple things, actually, a couple of instances where we did a client interview as part of the strategic plan for a very significant client of a really good, solid mid-sized firm. And the firm had not picked up on it. We weren't aware of it until we did it. But the client effectively said, we've been firing that firm for a number of years, and they're like not aware that we're gradually firing them. So, doing kind of the current position analysis, that's like a really important thing to know. Hey, we're getting fired. I had one not long ago where I did a client interview, and it was via Zoom, and I thought I was interviewing one person, like the general counsel of this client. And when I get on the Zoom, they were loaded for bear, and it was about 6 of them. And they were fully geared up to attack the firm. And interestingly, one of the things that they attacked the firm for was during the pandemic, when there would be Zooms, the associates of the firm kept their monitor off so they couldn't be seen. And that was like completely offensive to the client. And that was something that the firm needs to think about. It's a tiny little thing, but if you have a very ticked off significant client, that can have a huge impact on the firm's ultimate strategic success. So fortunately, in that case, we're able to catch it.
Excellent. Yeah, great examples. I'm going to do 2 quick more, and then I'm going to turn it over to you. And one is around the process itself. And when I asked the question about how frequently, part of that is it can be a very painful process. And I've worked in and with firms where it was so painful. My very first law firm, they brought in someone who had no knowledge of the legal industry, not worked in the sector, wasn't a consultant to the sector, and they paired us up in weird groupings, and the work was so onerous, and it just felt like it was such a chore, and nothing good came of it. And just as a PS to that story, 6 months later, that firm dissolved because they really weren't coordinated, and they just had no strategic coordination. So the process is important because you don't get too many bites at the apple. And if you want buy-in to your strategy and people moving forward on it, they need to feel like the process engaged them, was interesting, was not just busy work. So you have to be really careful of that, and who leads it and how you lead it, and the communications on that. And then I'm just going to quickly share an example from TerraLex. So when I came on board, which was 8 years ago now, the company did have a strategy. It was a very long document, and I'm not sure that too many people really knew it or bought into it. We did a quick revision, or it wasn't that quick, and it led to a 16-page document that nobody really read. But now, over the last 8 years, we eventually brought it down to the real core essence of what is our strategy, what is the value we bring. And we got it down to a 4-page bulleted document. So it was a little more easy for people to say, okay, now I get what TerraLex is about. But now we have a 2-slide depiction of our strategy. It's very graphic. It just shows exactly what we're all about and where we add value. And I think everybody now buys into it. And in the 8 years since we went in this direction, and one of our regional directors is on the call, so she can attest to this, we've moved from being strictly a referral network to very intentionally and deliberately being a network that's focused on collaborative business development, where our members pitch together against the large global law firms for multi-jurisdictional business, and very successful at that. And it was because we realized people have to wrap their arms around it and understand what we're trying to do. And we have been very diligent about all singing from the same hymn book, so to speak, and delivering that message consistently in all of our meetings, everywhere we can possibly go. So that's when it can work well. So let me turn it over. I don't know which one of you wants to go first and share maybe a couple of other examples. Julia, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. And I think I'll build on the client piece. So I'm much more robust and insistent about the client voice now. If you were talking to any of your clients and they were doing a strategic refresh or review, the chances that they did not speak to their clients in some form or another is zero. So I'm absolutely insistent that firms do speak with their clients, not only around the obvious opportunities, but around the differentiation. How do you know how you are differentiated if you're just second guessing yourself? You will find out an awful lot by asking your clients who else they engage and use, what other wows they have from different professional providers, not just legal as well. And then finally, around decision makers. The decision makers and the buyers are changing quite significantly. I've mentioned earlier they are younger. There's a lot of delegated authority now within general counsel offices. So the decision makers are younger. There's a lot more going on in procurement, and there's decision makers outside of law as well. So unless you actually engage with your clients, you're not going to find out the longer term opportunities, the who's making the decision, or what your competitors from outside of law as much are doing that you could learn from. So I'm really insistent on that. The other new thing that I would say you could learn from outside of law is how to get the younger generation voice into the strategy process. Now, Bill talked about, surveys and focus groups and one-to-ones, but increasingly firms are looking at having some form of a shadow executive committee, or actually using reverse mentoring as well. So there's a couple of other ways of getting that younger gen voice into strategic thinking, and not just at the time when you do a big review, but when you actually implement the strategy as well. So I just wanted to bring those ideas through.
Fabulous. And actually, both of those, and in particular, the younger lawyers piece of it, is on our plates right now. That's something we're considering as a network. Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you to share your examples, and actually you're the next slide as well. So let me know when you want me to flip to that.
Sure, we can stay with this one for now. The one thing I would add, Julia, it was just interesting what you said about bringing in the younger generation, because we see that commonly. When firms are forming even their strategic planning committee, they're looking for a wide range of demographics, offices, practices, ages, tenures with the firm, and all of those kinds of things, while ideally, again, having a really significant chunk of leadership involved in the strategic planning committee. So I think that's great, and I think it's wonderful. Unfortunately, what I've seen happen more than once, I saw it once, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that just happened, but I've seen it happen in multiple firms, is I guess what I would describe as dismissiveness. So at the strategic planning committee level, I've seen dismissiveness, and it's often from members of firm leadership being dismissive of the members of the strategic planning committee, that they're not actually, they're not really going to design the firm's strategic plan. And it's kind of already being decided almost out of the room by like a core group of leaders, which is obviously damaging to the folks that you brought into the strategic planning committee, who really want to be engaged and want to feel a part of it. So there's this level of dismissiveness, and it pops up every once in a while. It's definitely not the majority, thank goodness. So it's a small minority, but if you pull together a group like this and encourage them to develop a plan, and then kind of undercut them, it's a huge red flag, certainly for the strategic plan, but it's a huge red flag for the implementation. The other thing that I would say, and it ties into dismissiveness, and I only say this, Terri, because I think you said there are a number of consultants on the call. Mm-hmm. I've heard periodically from clients that consultants can also be dismissive of the law firm itself. So they go in with a fixed view, or they're dismissive of some of the concerns that are being raised by the firm, or they don't spend the time to get to know the firm as well as they should. As a result, they help craft a plan that doesn't really align with what the firm is trying to accomplish, because they had preconceived notions of this is what we're going to do, and this is what the end result is going to be, rather than looking at all the information, trying to craft something that truly is bespoke, that it is truly a unique strategic plan for the specific firm. So I'd say those two areas of dismissiveness to me are incredibly problematic. But again, fortunately, it doesn't happen all the time, but it does pop up periodically. And if it happens once, frankly, that's too much.
Yep,
So
absolutely. Ready for the next slide?
yeah, why don't we do that? So let's talk about overcoming the pitfalls. And again, these are the things, some of these I've already touched on, but these are the things that I think over the years have become more and more important. So the first is having a designated strategy team. It's often helpful when you get to the point of implementation that you don't simply dismiss the strategic planning committee. Thank you for your time. We're done now. We'll take it from here. It's better to have members of the strategic planning committee retain some kind of a role in helping to get the plan implemented. So some kind of strategy team, whatever you want to call the strategy board or something like that, some kind of group, including both lawyers and the non-lawyer professionals to help advance the implementation. So having a designated team, critically important. A clear implementation plan. So most strategic plans are usually 3 to 5 years, and most of them tend to be 5-year plans. In terms of the implementation plan, the most important piece, I believe, is the first 18 months. So have a very clear implementation plan, or here are the things that we're going to do over the next 18 months. Basically who's going to do what and by when, and break down the 18 months into smaller segments, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and the like. So have a very clear plan. Institutionalize the strategy. That what I'm thinking of there is speak about the strategy. Speak about what I said before, the low-hanging fruit. Hey, we had a great success. Let's talk it up. So people are aware of the strategic plan. It's not this thing that existed once and then we kind of put it on the shelf, but it's this living, breathing thing that we continue to focus on. Strengthening the support structure. That could be as simple as we need to take another look at our practice group leaders and our practice chairs or our office managing partners, because we want to make sure that we have the right people in the proper seats to help advance our firm and to help us achieve our goals. So strengthening support structure can be that kind of like governance leadership. It can be your professional staff leadership. It could be things like compensation system. Like, let's take a look at our compensation system to make sure that we have a system that encourages whatever the strategic initiatives, an increased focus on expanding client relationships and cross-selling. If you have a comp system that's much more focused on each person doing their own thing in sort of their own little silo, there's a disconnect. So take a look at the support structure. And the last piece is measure, follow up, and hold people accountable. And if they're not doing what's been asked of them, swap them out, put new people in place. In terms of measuring and following up is obviously, just, hey, have you done these 3 things that we've asked of you or we expected you to do? How do you do that? Firms that seem to have the best success implementing their strategic plan regularly get together to talk about status. So it could be every month we'll have a call, and then maybe it's going to go to like every 6 weeks or something like that. But it's not like, hey, let's talk about it in January, get back to you in July. It's not that kind of a gap. It's more, let's talk about it every month. What's the progress, so that there's a view that we're making progress toward our ultimate destination. And then in terms of measurement, what are you going to measure? My example earlier from my 200 lawyer firm, part of it was growth. So how are we doing on growth? Well, that's easy to measure. Like, are we building the practices that we wanted? How are we doing in terms of our financial performance? Maybe one of our strategies is we wanted to enhance our market profile. Well, how are we being recognized by our clients? Maybe one of the things that we want to do is we want to expand some of our existing client relationships. Okay, well, have we gone and have we targeted those clients, and have we seen new work come from those relationships? So I think focusing on all of the pieces where you can see like tangible results are critically important. Again, it helps you overcome the pitfalls, and it helps partners see that we really were serious about this. We really are going to try to accomplish what we put down on paper. So those are just some of the ways to overcome pitfalls. Julia, I can flip it to you if you have anything.
Bill, I wanted to just add 2 things to what you just said that fall out of what you just said, but 2 things that I've seen that work and help very well. One is when you're looking at your implementation plan and prioritizing the action items, some things that'll be in your plan likely are very long-term or difficult, like let's say changes to a compensation system or acquiring a firm or whatever it might be. But there are going to be things on there that you could have some quick wins, and you need to have those sooner rather than later, or people think the entire strategic planning exercise was a waste of their time. So they want to see some tangible action sooner. And you said something similar to that, but sooner rather than later.
Totally agree.
And I would also say, if you're the leader of an organization, you should be clear that you're making decisions that are based on the plan and encourage others in the firm to make decisions. So my team will tell you that, you know, things will come up all the time. We're never short of people offering us opportunities. And my test is, does this fit in with our strategy? Does it help us add value in the way that our strategy decides? And it's very helpful to make decisions that way, but don't just do that. Tell people you're doing that so that they understand that there was a real intrinsic value to your strategic plan.
Yep. Yeah, and Terry, one of the things that we see firms focus on periodically is they'll take a look at their client base. And one of the things they want to do strategically is we really want to upgrade our client base. You know, we want to maybe move away from some of these very small client relationships that are not profitable and they're not really strategically important. So if on the client intake piece, you can say, we're not going to accept that matter or that client because it doesn't tie into our strategy. That makes a heck of a lot of sense. Unfortunately, I think what happens often is somebody brings a new client or a new matter into the firm, and sometimes firms just overlook the client intake criteria they put in place as part of their strategy, and they bring in whatever cat and dog that they really shouldn't have, you know. And again, at that point, you've fallen into one of the strategy implementation traps.
Yeah, they bring in their future collections issues.
Yes, right.
Julia, in our last couple of minutes, anything you want to add to the pitfalls or any final comments that you might have?
I think to springboard from Bill's point there, to be able to answer what will we not be doing, and that was a great one around client types, because law firms typically add things rather than subtract things, and it's all an opportunity cost. You know, your time and energy and your people and resources can only go so far, and if you dissipate them, so I would always, as a strategic planning group anyway, be very clear about what are we not doing, what have we decided not to do.
I put this slide up just so if anyone wanted to copy down email addresses, but you will get a copy of the slides. I'm actually going to stop sharing though now and just open it up and say, does anyone have any questions or anything that you experienced that you want to share? We have a couple minutes. We can do a little bit of that. Anyone who wants to, just feel free to unmute and jump right in. No. I unfortunately didn't get to watch the audience because I was watching the slides. Hopefully there was a lot of head nodding. I know many of you on this call have been there, done that more than one time. And so hopefully you learned some new lessons. I'd like to thank Bill Johnston and Julia Hayhoe for participating and joining the college on this particular program. And Debbie, I think you have a poll that you'd like everyone to take. You there, Debbie? Maybe
Yes.
Okay, I'll let you launch the poll and handle that. So please stay for a moment and take Debbie's poll. I think we're losing people rapidly
Yep.
because we're at the top of the hour and I'm sure people have to get going. Great
Right.
feedback though in the chat, so thanks everybody. Great.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having us. See you later.